What would you do if the person who destroyed your life was sitting right there watching you? Imagine standing backstage at Carnegie Hall. 2,800 people waiting in silence. The most important performance of your life just seconds away. Your hands are trembling. Your heart is racing. And then you look out into the audience row, 3-seat 12, and you see him. The person who humiliated you in front of thousands. The person who made you want to disappear. The person who laughed while your world fell apart. That's exactly where Terrence Blake found himself on a cold November night. 8 years after a video of him went viral for all the wrong reasons. 8 years after he became a joke to an entire town. 8 years after he dropped out of school and disappeared. But tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't running. Tonight, he was standing on one of the most prestigious stages in the world, and Brandon Mitchell, the boy who destroyed him, was about to watch him do the impossible. How did a kid who was humiliated in front of thousands online end up here about to perform in front of thousands in person? How does someone go from rock bottom to Carnegie Hall? How does the victim become the victor? This is that story. Let's go back to where it all began. Asheville, North Carolina. A small town tucked in the Blue Ridge Mountains where everyone knows everyone and secrets don't stay secret for long. Terrence Blake. Terry, to his friends, was 14 years old. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of town with his mother, Lisa, who cleaned houses for wealthy families, and his father, Marcus, who worked 60-hour weeks at the textile factory. They didn't have much. Some months they didn't have enough. But they had each other, and they had something else too. They had music playing through their walls, old gospel records his grandmother had left them, Aretha Franklin and Mahalia Jackson filling their small home with something that felt bigger than their circumstances. Terry loved those sounds. He would close his eyes and let the music wash over him, imagining himself creating something that beautiful, something that powerful. One Sunday after church, Terry was helping his mother clean up the fellowship hall when he noticed a door he'd never paid attention to before. It was slightly open, and through the crack he could see something covered with a dusty sheet. His curiosity got the better of him. He walked over, pulled back the sheet, and there it was. An old upright piano probably hadn't been played in decades, keys yellowed with age, but to Terry, it looked like treasure. He sat down on the bench. He didn't know what he was doing. He'd never taken a lesson, never touched a piano before. But he pressed a key, then another, and something happened. Something clicked. His fingers started moving across the keys, searching, exploring, finding patterns and melodies that somehow made sense to him. The church pastor, Reverend Williams, heard the music and came to investigate. He stood in the doorway, watching this young boy who'd never played before, creating something beautiful out of thin air. When Terry finally stopped and turned around, embarrassed to be caught, Reverend Williams just smiled. "Son," he said, "I think you just found your gift." From that day forward, Terry spent every spare moment at that piano. Before school after school weekends, he taught himself everything. He watched videos online, studied classical composers, jazz legends, gospel pianists. His fingers flew across those keys like they were born to be there. And they were. Terry had something rare, something special. Raw, untrained, but undeniable talent. By the time he was 16, everyone in Asheville knew about Terry Blake and his piano. He played at church every Sunday. He played at community events. He played whenever and wherever someone would let him. Music became his language. The piano became his voice. And that's when everything started to fall apart. Asheville High School's annual talent show was the biggest event of the year. Every student with any kind of talent signed up. Singers, dancers, comedians, bands. It was a chance to shine, to be seen, to matter. Terry decided to audition. He'd never performed in front of that many people before, but Reverend Williams encouraged him. "Let them hear what God gave you," he said. The auditions were held after school in the auditorium. Terry waited nervously in the wings, watching other students perform. Some were good, some weren't. And then he heard it. Piano music. Someone else playing classical music. He peeked around the curtain and saw Brandon Mitchell on stage. Brandon was everything Terry wasn't. Wealthy family, expensive clothes, private piano lessons since he was 5. His parents had bought him a Steinway grand piano for his bedroom. He'd been trained by professionals, taught proper technique, given every advantage. Brandon's performance was technically perfect. Every note precisely placed. Every dynamic exactly as written. It was impressive. Polished. But it was cold. Mechanical. There was no soul in it, no fire, no feeling. It was music played by someone who'd been taught how to play, but had never learned why. When Brandon finished the audition, judges clapped politely. "Very nice, Brandon, the music teacher," Mrs. Henderson said. "Very well executed." Then, it was Terry's turn. He walked onto that stage in his worn sneakers and his father's too big dress shirt, sat down at the school's old piano, and closed his eyes. He didn't play classical music. He played what he felt. A gospel tune that morphed into jazz, that built into something powerful and original. His fingers danced across those keys. His whole body moved with the music. He played with passion, with purpose, with something that couldn't be taught in any lesson. When he finished, the auditorium was silent for a moment. Then the judges erupted. Mrs. Henderson stood up. "Terry," she said, her voice filled with emotion that was extraordinary. Terry got the spot. The closing performance. The most prestigious slot in the show. Brandon got a spot too, but earlier in the lineup. Less important. Less impressive. As Terry walked off stage, he passed Brandon in the wings. Brandon's face was tight with something Terry couldn't quite read. But it wasn't congratulations. It wasn't respect. It was something darker, something dangerous. "Nice job," Brandon said, his voice flat. "Thanks, man," Terry replied, trying to be friendly. "You too." Brandon didn't respond. He just turned and walked away. And in that moment, something shifted. Something broke. Jealousy had taken root, and it was about to grow into something terrible. It started small. Almost unnoticeable at first. Terry would come to school and find his locker defaced. Nothing major, just scratches, stupid drawings. He'd find his sheet music torn, pages missing. He'd sit down in the cafeteria, and suddenly the table around him would clear out. People would whisper as he walked by, then laugh when he turned around. He tried to ignore it. He told himself it didn't matter. He had his music. He had the talent show coming up. That's what mattered. But it got worse. One day, Terry came to school to find his backpack had been taken from his locker and thrown in the trash, his books covered in mustard and ketchup. Another day, someone wrote, "Poor boy thinks he's special" across his locker in permanent marker. The janitor had to repaint it. And then there was Brandon, always there, always watching, always surrounded by his friends. Rich kids who'd grown up with every advantage, who thought the world owed them everything, who couldn't stand the fact that someone like Terry, someone with nothing, could have something they didn't. Talent they couldn't buy. Brandon never did anything directly. He was too smart for that. But Terry would see him whisper to his friends, and then his friends would do something. Trip Terry in the hallway, knock his lunch tray out of his hands, block his path to class. "Hey, Terry," one of Brandon's friends, a kid named Kyle, said one day in the hallway. "I heard you learned piano from YouTube. That's so cute. You know, real musicians have real teachers. They don't just figure it out themselves like some kind of circus monkey." The kids around them laughed. Terry's face burned with humiliation, but he kept walking. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. But inside, he was breaking. Every day, piece by piece. His mother noticed. "Baby, what's going on at school?" she asked one evening over dinner. "You've been so quiet lately. Nothing." Mama Terry lied. "Just focusing on the talent show. It's next week." She looked at him with those eyes that saw everything, but she didn't push. She just reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Whatever happens," she said, "we're proud of you. You hear me? So proud." Terry nodded, but he couldn't look at her, because he could feel it building. Something bad was coming. He could feel it in the way Brandon looked at him in the halls, in the whispers that followed him everywhere, in the tightness in his chest every time he walked through those school doors. The talent show was in 5 days. 5 days until Terry could prove himself, could show everyone what he was capable of, could stand on that stage and let his music speak for itself. But Brandon had other plans. The night of the talent show, the auditorium was packed. Parents, students, teachers, community members. Over 500 people filled every seat. Terry's parents were in the front row, his mother wearing her Sunday best, his father in a suit he'd borrowed from Reverend Williams. They were beaming with pride. Backstage, Terry was nervous but ready. He'd practiced his piece 1,000 times. He knew it by heart. He'd poured everything into this moment. The show started. Act after act took the stage. Singers, dancers, a comedy duo that got big laughs. Brandon performed early his classical piece, technically flawless, as always polished, but cold. The audience clapped respectfully. He took his bow and walked off stage, his face expressionless. Finally, it was Terry's turn. The final act. The closing performance. Mrs. Henderson walked onto the stage to introduce him. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've saved the best for last. Please welcome our final performer, Terrence Blake." The audience applauded. Terry took a deep breath, said a quick prayer, and walked onto that stage. The spotlight hit him warm and bright. He could see his parents in the front row, his mother with her hands clasped together, his father with tears already in his eyes. Terry sat down at the piano. He placed his hands on the keys. He closed his eyes. And he began to play. The music filled the auditorium. Beautiful, powerful, emotional. He played with everything he had, every ounce of passion, every bit of soul. The audience was mesmerized. You could feel it in the room, that collective awe, that recognition that they were witnessing something special. Terry was about 30 seconds into his performance, right as he was hitting his stride when it happened. The large projection screen behind him, the one they'd been using to display the show's title card, suddenly flickered to life. A video started playing. Loud. Impossible to ignore. It was Terry. Or rather, a deep fake of Terry. Someone had taken footage of him and edited it, manipulated it, created something cruel and humiliating. In the video, Terry was playing piano, but the audio had been replaced with cartoon sound effects, silly noises, fart sounds. The video Terry was labeled YouTube University Graduate and Poor Boys Got Talent. Text overlays appeared. When you can't afford real lessons, When you think you're special, but you're just poor ghetto prodigy." The audience gasped. Some people laughed, not knowing what else to do. Terry's hands froze on the keys. He turned around and saw the screen, saw himself being mocked on a massive display in front of everyone he knew. His mother stood up, her hand over her mouth. His father was trying to get to the stage. Mrs. Henderson was rushing to turn off the projector, but the damage was done. Terry stood up from the piano. His face was burning. His eyes were filling with tears. 500 people were staring at him. Some were laughing. Some were looking away in embarrassment. Some were recording it on their phones. He ran. Off the stage, through the wings, out the back door of the auditorium. He could hear his mother calling his name, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He just ran. By the next morning, the video was everywhere. Someone had recorded the whole thing, the edited video, playing on the screen Terry's face as he realized what was happening, his humiliating exit from the stage. It was posted to social media, shared, reshared, commented on, laughed at. Poor kid thought he was good. That's what happens when you're self-taught. He should have stayed in his lane. Imagine thinking YouTube can teach you piano. The comments went on and on. Cruel, relentless, merciless. By Monday morning, the video had been viewed over 50,000 times. By the end of the week, over 200,000. It kept spreading, kept getting shared, kept destroying Terry piece by piece. School was unbearable. People pointed at him in the hallways. They played the video on their phones as he walked by. They made the sound effects from the video whenever they saw him. Every class he walked into, every corner he turned, there it was. The reminder of his humiliation. Brandon and his friends were loving it. They'd walk past Terry's locker and laugh. They'd sit behind him in class and whisper just loud enough for him to hear. "Hey Terry, play us a song. Make sure you use the right sound effects." Terry stopped going to the cafeteria. He stopped participating in class. He stopped playing piano at church. Every time he looked at a piano, all he could see was that moment, that screen, that laughter. His parents tried to help. They called the school, demanded an investigation into who had created and played the video. But there was no proof. The video had been uploaded from an anonymous account. The school's AV system had been hacked, they said. They couldn't prove who did it, even though everyone knew. Everyone had seen Brandon's satisfied smile when it happened. Everyone had heard his friends laughing the loudest. "We're so sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Blake," the principal said. "We're taking this very seriously." But without concrete evidence, the message was clear. Nothing was going to happen. No one was going to be held accountable. Terry was just supposed to move on, supposed to get over it, supposed to forget that his dignity had been ripped away in front of 500 people and then broadcast to the world. His mother held him one night as he cried. "Baby, I know it hurts," she said. "But you can't let them take your music from you. That's your gift. That's who you are." But Terry couldn't hear her. All he could hear was the laughter. All he could see was that screen. All he could feel was the humiliation burning through him like fire. 2 weeks after the talent show, Terry made a decision. He wasn't going back to school. He couldn't. Every day there was torture. Every face was a reminder. Every whisper was a knife. "I can't do it anymore, Mama," he said. "I can't go back there." His parents were heartbroken, but they understood. They tried to find alternatives. Homeschooling. Online classes. But Terry was checked out. He was done. Not just with school, with everything. He stopped playing piano completely. The church asked him to play one Sunday, and he couldn't even walk through the doors. His gift, the thing that had defined him, had become a source of shame. Brandon Mitchell had won. He'd taken Terry's dignity, his confidence, his music, his future. And he'd gotten away with it. But this story doesn't end there. Not even close. 6 months after the talent show incident, Terry turned 16. And he made another decision. He was leaving Asheville. His parents didn't want him to go. "Baby, you're too young," his mother pleaded. "Stay here. We'll figure it out together." But Terry couldn't stay. Every street corner held a memory. Every familiar face was a reminder. This town had watched him be destroyed and had done nothing. Some had even participated, had shared that video, had laughed along. He couldn't heal here. He couldn't breathe here. "I have to go, Mama," he said. "I have to figure out who I am without all of this." His father slipped him $200, all they could spare. His mother packed him a bag with clothes and food. They drove him to the bus station at dawn, all three of them crying, knowing this might be goodbye for a long time. "You call us every day," his mother said, holding him tight. "Every single day." "You hear me? I will, Mama. I promise." And Terry, his father, said, his voice thick with emotion, "Don't let them take your music forever. That's yours. That's in your soul. They can't really take that unless you let them." Terry nodded, but he didn't believe it. His music felt dead inside him. His passion felt buried under too much pain. He got on a Greyhound bus headed to Charlotte. It was only 130 miles away, but it felt like a different world. Big enough to disappear. Big enough to start over. Big enough to hide. Charlotte was overwhelming at first. Tall buildings, busy streets, people everywhere who didn't know his name, didn't know his story, didn't care. It was exactly what he needed. Terry found a room in a boarding house on the east side. $50 a week for a space barely bigger than a closet-shared bathroom down the hall, paper-thin walls. But it was his. Anonymous. Safe. He got a job washing dishes at a diner called Betty's on Trade Street. It was hard work, hot and greasy and endless. But it was mindless, and mindless was good. He didn't have to think. He didn't have to feel. He just had to scrub. He worked nights, 10-hour shifts, 7 days a week when they'd let him. He'd come home exhausted, collapse on his narrow bed, stare at the ceiling until he fell asleep, then wake up and do it all again. This was his life now. This was what he'd become. A kid with no education, no prospects, no future. Working a dead-end job in a city where no one knew his name. He called his mother every Sunday like he'd promised. He lied to her about how he was doing. "I'm good, Mama. I'm figuring things out." She tried to sound convinced, but he could hear the worry in her voice. Months passed, then a year. Terry turned 17 in that boarding house alone, eating cheap takeout. No cake, no candles, no celebration. He tried not to think about where he'd thought he'd be at 17. Probably in school, probably planning for college music programs, probably playing piano every day. But that was a different life. That was a different Terry. That Terry was dead killed on a stage in front of 500 people. This Terry was just trying to survive. He avoided music completely. If a song came on the radio, he'd change the station. If he walked past a bar with live music, he'd cross the street. He couldn't handle it. The sound of piano especially, it was like a knife to the chest. It reminded him of everything he'd lost. But here's the thing about gifts. Real gifts. They don't die easily. They don't stay buried. They have a way of fighting their way back to the surface, of demanding to be acknowledged, of refusing to be silenced forever. Terry was about to discover that the hard way. It was a Thursday night in October, almost 2 years after Terry had left Asheville. He was walking home from his shift at the diner, exhausted, his feet aching. his hands raw from hot water and chemicals. The streets were mostly empty, just the occasional car passing, the distant sound of the city humming its night song. He took a different route that night. He doesn't know why. Maybe he was tired of seeing the same buildings, the same streets. Maybe some part of him was searching for something without knowing what. But he turned down a street he'd never walked before, and that's when he heard it. Piano music. Live piano music, coming from a small club halfway down the block. The sound stopped him dead in his tracks. It had been so long since he'd let himself really listen to piano. But this was different. This wasn't some recording on the radio. This was real, raw, immediate. Someone was playing jazz, improvising fingers, dancing across keys, with a freedom and joy that made Terry's chest ache with something he thought had died. The club was called the Blue Note. Small, unassuming, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. A neon sign flickered above the door. Through the window, Terry could see people inside, dim lights, the silhouette of someone at the piano. He knew he should keep walking. He knew listening would hurt. But his feet wouldn't move. He stood on that sidewalk for 20 minutes, listening to that pianist play, feeling something long dormant start to stir inside him. When the music stopped and people started filing out, Terry finally walked away. But he came back the next night. And the night after that, just standing outside listening, feeling that ache grow stronger. On the fourth night, the club was closed. The lights were off. Terry was about to leave when he noticed the side door was slightly open. He shouldn't have gone in. He knew better. But something pulled him forward, something stronger than logic or fear. He slipped inside. The club was empty chairs stacked on tables, just a single light on near the bar. And there in the corner was the piano. A beautiful Yamaha Grand, black and sleek and perfect. Terry walked toward it like he was in a trance. He hadn't touched a piano in 2 years. 2 years of running from his gift, of pretending it didn't matter, of trying to kill the thing that had once defined him. He sat down on the bench. His hands were shaking. He placed them on the keys, and for a moment, he couldn't move. Fear paralyzed him. Fear that he'd forgotten how. Fear that it would hurt too much. Fear that he'd try and discover there was nothing left. But then his fingers moved. One note, then another, then a chord. And suddenly it all came flooding back. The muscle memory, the instinct, the connection between his heart and his hands. He started playing soft at first, tentative, but then stronger, more confident. He played a melody that had been trapped inside him for 2 years, desperate to get out. He played for 20 minutes, lost in the music, lost in the feeling of being whole again. And he didn't notice the man standing in the shadows watching. You didn't learn that in any school. Terry's hands froze. He spun around on the bench, his heart hammering. A man stepped into the light. Late 50s, silver hair, weathered face, expensive suit. He was carrying a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. "I'm sorry," Terry stammered, standing up. "I didn't mean to break in." The door was open, and I just... "Relax, kid," the man said, walking closer. "I left it open. I saw you standing outside every night this week. Figured eventually you'd get curious enough to come in." He set the glasses down on the piano. "I'm Roberto Castellano. I own this place. I'm Terry." "I'm really sorry, Mr. Castellano. I'll leave." "Sit down," Roberto said, pouring whiskey into both glasses. "And call me Roberto." He handed one glass to Terry, who took it hesitantly. "Now tell me your story, because someone who plays like that has a story." Terry didn't want to tell it. He'd spent 2 years trying to forget it. But something about this man, something about the way he looked at Terry, not with pity, but with understanding, made the words start flowing. He told Roberto everything. The talent show, the video, the humiliation, running away, the 2 years of hiding from music, from himself, from his gift. Roberto listened without interrupting, sipping his whiskey, his eyes never leaving Terry's face. When Terry finished, Roberto was quiet for a long moment. "So you let them win," Roberto finally said. Terry bristled. "What? These kids who humiliated you, you let them win. You let them take your gift away. You let them define who you are." "They destroyed me," Terry said, anger flashing. "You don't understand what it was like." "Don't I?" Roberto leaned back against the piano. "When I was 22, I was a concert pianist, playing halls in Europe, making a name for myself. Then I got in a car accident. Broke 3 fingers on my right hand. Doctors said I'd never play professionally again. I spent 5 years drinking myself stupid, feeling sorry for myself, convinced my life was over." He held up his right hand. Terry could see the crooked angles of fingers that hadn't healed quite right. "But eventually I realized something. They didn't take my music. The accident didn't take my music. I gave it away. I handed it over like a coward." Terry looked down at his own hands. "What you have," Roberto continued, "is rare. Raw talent like that. It's a gift from God or the universe or whatever you believe in. And you're burying it because some punk kids hurt your feelings." "It was more than that," Terry said quietly. "I know it was. I'm not minimizing your pain, kid. What they did was cruel. But here's the truth. You can let that moment define you, or you can let it refine you. You can stay a victim, or you can become something greater." Roberto poured more whiskey. "What do you want?" Terry really want. Terry thought about it. For 2 years, he'd been trying not to want anything. Wanting hurt. Dreaming hurt. But sitting at that piano, feeling those keys under his fingers, again, something had awakened. "I want to play," he whispered. "I want to be a pianist, a real one." "Then that's what you'll do," Roberto said simply. "I'll teach you." Terry stared at Roberto, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "You'll teach me?" Why, Roberto smiled. "Because talent like yours doesn't come along often, and because I see myself in you, the version of me that could have been great if I hadn't spent 5 years feeling sorry for myself. I can't get those years back, but maybe I can help you not waste yours." "I can't pay you," Terry said. "I barely make rent." "I don't want your money," Roberto said, "but I need help around here. Bartending, cleaning, setting up for shows. You work for me 3 nights a week. I'll train you the other nights. Free of charge." Deal. Terry couldn't believe what he was hearing. Deal. They shook hands, and in that moment, Terry's life changed direction. The next night, Terry showed up at the Blue Note at 6 p.m. like Roberto had instructed. The club didn't open until 8, so they had 2 hours alone with the piano. "All right," Roberto said, sitting down next to Terry on the bench. "Play me something. Anything." Terry played the piece he'd been working on before everything fell apart, a classical piece by Chopin. His fingers moved across the keys with technical proficiency, hitting all the right notes, maintaining proper tempo. When he finished, Roberto was silent for a moment. Then he said, "That was very good. Technically excellent, actually, but it was also completely soulless." Terry felt defensive. "What do you mean you're playing the notes, but you're not playing the music? You're so focused on getting it right that you forgot to make it mean something." Roberto stood up and started pacing. "Tell me, why do you play piano? And don't give me some bullshit answer about loving music. Why do you play? Terry thought about it. Because when I play, I feel free. Like nothing else matters. Like I can say things I can't put into words. Good, Roberto said. That's what I want to hear in your music. Not perfection, feeling, honesty, truth. He sat back down. We're going to rebuild your technique from the ground up. Proper posture, proper fingering music theory. All the things you never learned teaching yourself. But we're also going to make sure you never lose that thing that makes you special. That raw emotion. That connection. And so began the most intense period of Terry's life. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, Terry worked at the Blue Note. He learned to make drinks, manage difficult customers, set up sound equipment. He watched world-class musicians perform on that small stage, studied their techniques, their stage presence, their relationship with the audience. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, he trained with Roberto. 2 hours before the club opened, sometimes more after it closed. Roberto was a demanding teacher, pushing Terry harder than he'd ever been pushed. When Terry got sloppy, Roberto called him on it. When Terry's technique slipped, they'd drill it for hours until it was perfect. But Roberto also taught him things that went beyond technique. He taught him about music history, about the great composers, and what made them great. He taught him about different styles, jazz and classical and everything in between. He taught him about performance, about connecting with an audience, about channeling emotion through music. Music isn't about showing off how fast you can play, Roberto would say. It's about communication. You're telling a story with every note. Make me feel something. Make me understand something. Make me remember this moment. Terry absorbed it all like a sponge. He practiced until his fingers ached. He studied until his eyes burned. He worked until he collapsed into bed at 2 a.m., only to wake up 6 hours later to do it all again. Months passed, then a year, then 2 years. Terry got better, not just technically, but artistically. He developed his own style, blending the classical training Roberto gave him with the raw, emotional playing that came naturally. He started performing at the Blue Note, small sets during slow nights, building confidence, learning to handle the pressure of live performance. He still called his mother every Sunday. He told her about Roberto, about the training, about slowly finding his way back to music. She cried the first time he told her he was playing again. "I knew it," she said. "I knew they couldn't take that from you forever." 3 years passed, then 4. Terry was 20 now, no longer the scared 16-year-old kid who'd run away from home. He'd grown physically filled out, gotten stronger. But more than that, he'd grown as an artist. The regular customers at the Blue Note started coming specifically to see Terry play. Word spread. Local music critics started showing up. Roberto watched his progress with pride. "You're ready," he told Terry one night after a particularly powerful performance. "Ready for what? To be more than a jazz club pianist. You're good enough for the big stages now, Terry. Concert halls, prestigious venues. That's where you belong." Terry felt a flutter of fear. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." "You'll never feel ready," Roberto said. "But you are. Trust me." Roberto started entering Terry's name in competitions, sending recordings to music programs, networking with his old contacts in the classical music world. Terry won a few local competitions, earned some recognition, started building a resume. But nothing could have prepared him for the email that arrived on a Tuesday morning in November, 6 years after that night when Terry first walked into the Blue Note. Terry was cleaning glasses behind the bar when his phone buzzed. It was an email from an address he didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Performance Opportunity, National Youth Orchestra Foundation." His hands were shaking as he opened it. Dear Mr. Blake, we came across your performance recordings through a colleague's recommendation. Your talent is extraordinary. We would like to invite you to perform as a featured soloist at our annual fundraising gala at Carnegie Hall in New York City on December 15th. This is a prestigious event attended by major donors, critics, and music industry professionals. It would be an excellent opportunity to showcase your abilities to an influential audience. The performance would be Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 with our orchestra. We understand this is short notice, but we believe you are more than capable. We will cover all travel and accommodation expenses. Please let us know your decision within 48 hours. Sincerely, Margaret Richardson, Director, National Youth Orchestra Foundation. Terry read it 3 times to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. Carnegie Hall, one of the most famous concert halls in the world, where legends had performed, where careers were made. Roberto, he called out. Roberto came out from the back office. What's wrong? Read this, Terry said, handing him the phone. Roberto read the email and a huge smile spread across his face. I knew it. I knew this was coming. Wait, did you have something to do with this? I might have sent some recordings to an old colleague who works with the foundation, Roberto admitted. But they wouldn't have invited you if you weren't good enough. This is all you, kid. Terry felt overwhelmed. Carnegie Hall, Roberto. That's where you belong, Roberto said firmly. This is your moment. Everything you've worked for, everything you've overcome, it's all led to this. But Rachmaninoff's Concerto No. 2. That's one of the most difficult pieces in the repertoire. I've never performed it with a full orchestra. You've been practicing it for 3 months, Roberto pointed out. You know it backwards and forwards, and yes, it's difficult. It's supposed to be difficult. That's the point. This is your chance to show the world what you can do. Terry paced behind the bar, his mind racing. What if I freeze? What if I mess up? What if you're brilliant? Roberto interrupted. What if this changes your life? What if this is the redemption you've been waiting for? He put his hand on Terry's shoulder. Fear is normal, but don't let it make your decisions. You're ready for this. I wouldn't have sent those recordings if I didn't believe that completely. Terry took a deep breath. He thought about the scared 16-year-old kid who'd run away from Asheville 6 years ago. He thought about the nights spent washing dishes trying to forget he'd ever had a dream. He thought about finding Roberto, about the blue note, about the thousands of hours of practice that had led to this moment. Okay, he said. I'll do it. Roberto grinned. That's my boy. Now we've got 3 weeks to get you ready for the biggest performance of your life. The next 3 weeks were a blur of intense preparation. Terry and Roberto worked on the Rachmaninoff Concerto every single day. They broke it down movement by movement, phrase by phrase, note by note. Roberto was more demanding than he'd ever been, pushing Terry to perfection, refusing to accept anything less than excellence. This isn't the blue note, Roberto would say during particularly grueling practice sessions. This is Carnegie Hall. There's no room for error. Every note matters. Every dynamic matters. Every pause matters. Terry practiced until his fingers were sore, until he could play the entire concerto in his sleep. He studied recordings of the great pianists who'd performed it, analyzing their interpretations, finding his own voice within the piece. But as the date grew closer, anxiety started to creep in. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, his heart pounding, imagining himself on that stage, forgetting the notes, freezing in front of thousands of people. The memories of the talent show would flood back, that moment of humiliation, that laughter, that video on the screen. What if it happens again, he asked Roberto one night a week before the performance. What if I get up there and just break? Roberto set down his whiskey glass and looked Terry in the eye. Then you break, and then you get back up. But I don't think that's going to happen. You know why? Why? Because you're not that scared 16-year-old kid anymore. You're a trained, disciplined, incredibly talented pianist who's worked his ass off for 6 years to get here. You're ready. Your skill is ready. The only question is your mind ready? Terry thought about it. I don't know. Then make it ready, Roberto said. Look, I can't promise you won't be nervous. You will be. That's human. I can't promise nothing will go wrong. Maybe something will. But what I can promise you is this. If you get up on that stage and play with everything you have, with all the passion and skill you've developed, you will be magnificent. Not because I said so, because I've watched you become magnificent. Those words stayed with Terry as the performance date approached. The foundation sent him information about the event. It would be a full house, 2,800 seats sold out. Major donors, music critics, industry professionals. The orchestra was world class. The conductor was renowned. This was the real deal. They also sent him a list of attendees who'd confirmed their presence. Terry skimmed through it, seeing names he didn't recognize, foundations, and companies, and wealthy donors. And then he saw a name that made his blood run cold. Brandon Mitchell. Brandon's family had apparently made a significant donation to the foundation. They'd been invited as VIP guests. Brandon would be there, in the audience, watching. Terry's hands started shaking. He showed the list to Roberto. Of course he'll be there, Roberto said calmly. The universe has a sense of drama. This is your chance, Terry, not for revenge, but for closure, for showing him, showing yourself, showing everyone who doubted you what you've become. I don't know if I can do it with him watching. Yes, you can, Roberto said firmly. In fact, you're going to do it because he's watching. Every note you play will be proof that he didn't destroy you. He tried. He humiliated you. He drove you away. But you survived. You grew. You became something he could never be with all his money and advantages. You became an artist. Terry nodded slowly, trying to absorb the truth of those words. 2 days before the performance, Roberto gave him a gift. A new suit, perfectly tailored, elegant, and professional. You're going to walk on that stage looking like the artist you are, Roberto said. The night before the performance, Terry couldn't sleep. He lay in his small room, staring at the ceiling, replaying the concerto in his mind, imagining the stage, the audience, Brandon's face in the crowd. He thought about his parents back in Asheville, who he hadn't seen in 6 years. He'd called them to tell them about Carnegie Hall. His mother had cried. His father had said, "I knew you'd find your way back, son. I always knew." They couldn't afford to come to New York, couldn't take time off work, but they'd be watching the live stream the foundation was providing. Half of Asheville would probably be watching, seeing Terry Blake, the kid who'd been humiliated and driven away, performing at one of the most prestigious venues in the world. As dawn broke over, Charlotte Terry finally fell into a fitful sleep. When he woke 3 hours later, it was time. Time to face his past. Time to prove his present. Time to claim his future. The flight to New York felt surreal. Terry had never been on a plane before. He pressed his face against the window during takeoff, watching Charlotte shrink below him, feeling like he was leaving behind the boy he'd been, and flying toward the man he was becoming. Roberto had wanted to come, but he couldn't leave the Blue Note for 3 days. "You don't need me there," he'd said at the airport. "You've got everything you need right here." He'd tapped Terry's chest over his heart. Trust yourself. Trust your training. And most importantly, trust your gift. The foundation had arranged for a car to pick Terry up from JFK. As they drove into Manhattan, Terry stared out at the towering buildings, the crowds of people, the energy of the city. This was a different world from Charlotte, from Asheville, from everything he knew. The hotel was nicer than anywhere he'd ever stayed. A real hotel, not a boarding house or cheap motel. The bellhop showed him to his room, and Terry tipped him the $5 he could spare, feeling both generous and inadequate. He had one night in New York before the performance. The foundation had scheduled a brief rehearsal with the orchestra for the next afternoon, then the performance that evening. Terry tried to relax, tried to see some of the city, but his mind wouldn't stop spinning. He walked through Times Square, overwhelmed by the lights and noise and humanity. He walked past street performers, saw a man playing saxophone on a corner, left him the last of his cash. That night he video called Roberto from his hotel room. "How you feeling?" Roberto asked. "Terrified," Terry admitted. "Good. That means you care. Now listen to me. Tomorrow when you walk on that stage, I want you to remember something. You're not just playing for yourself. You're playing for every kid who's ever been bullied, ever been told they're not good enough, ever been made to feel small. You're playing for your parents who sacrificed so you could have a chance. You're playing for me because teaching you has been the greatest honor of my life. And you're playing for that 16-year-old kid who ran away from Asheville thinking his life was over. Show him how wrong he was." Terry felt tears building. "Thank you, Roberto, for everything. Thank me by being brilliant tomorrow. Now get some sleep. Big day ahead." But Terry didn't sleep. He couldn't. He spent the night playing the concerto on the desk in his hotel room, his fingers moving through the air, practicing without sound, feeling each note in his mind. The next morning he woke with the sunrise. He ordered room service for the first time in his life, ate breakfast by the window overlooking the city, and tried to center himself. At 2 p.m., a car picked him up and drove him to Carnegie Hall. The building was magnificent. Historic, elegant, iconic. Terry stood on the sidewalk for a moment, staring up at it, unable to believe he was about to walk inside. The rehearsal went well. The orchestra was professional and welcoming. The conductor, Maestro Chen, was impressed with Terry's preparation. "You know this piece inside and out," he said. "Trust that knowledge. Trust your instincts. We'll follow your lead." They ran through the concerto, once working out timing and dynamics. Terry's fingers flew across the keys, muscle memory taking over the music flowing through him. When they finished, the orchestra applauded. "We'll see you tonight, Mr. Blake," Maestro Chen said with a smile. "Break a leg." Terry went back to the hotel. He tried to nap, but couldn't. He took a long shower, trying to wash away the anxiety. He put on the suit Roberto had given him, stood in front of the mirror, and barely recognized himself. He looked like a professional. He looked like someone who belonged on that stage. At 6 p.m., the car came to take him back to Carnegie Hall. The performance was scheduled for 8 p.m. Doors opened at 7. Terry would need to be backstage by 7:30. As they drove through the Manhattan streets, Terry's phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "We love you, baby. So proud. So proud. Play your heart out." Another from Roberto. "Trust yourself. You've got this." The car pulled up to the stage entrance of Carnegie Hall. Terry took a deep breath, grabbed his bag, and stepped out onto the New York City street. This was it. The moment everything had been building toward. In 2 hours, he would walk onto one of the most famous stages in the world. And Brandon Mitchell would be watching. Game time. Backstage at Carnegie Hall was controlled chaos. Musicians tuning instruments, stage managers coordinating logistics, the energy buzzing with pre-show anticipation. Terry was shown to a private dressing room. It was small but elegant, a mirror with lights, a comfortable couch, water, and snacks laid out. There was a card on the table. Mr. Blake, break a leg tonight. We're honored to have you. The Foundation. He sat down on the couch and tried to breathe. His hands were shaking. He looked at them. These hands that had washed dishes for years, that had practiced until they bled, that had learned to channel emotion into music. Would they fail him tonight? There was a knock on the door. Mr. Blake. 30 minutes to places. 30 minutes. Terry stood up and started pacing. He could hear the audience arriving, the rumble of voices, the excitement building. 2,800 people filling those iconic red seats. He thought about the talent show. 500 people. That had seemed like so many. This was almost 6 times that. And it wasn't just any audience. These were critics, professionals, people who would judge every note, every mistake, every hesitation. And Brandon would be somewhere in that crowd. Probably in some VIP section, probably dressed in an expensive suit, probably with that same smug expression he'd always had. Terry felt anger rising. Good. He could use anger. Anger was fuel. Another knock. Mr. Blake. 15 minutes. Terry did some hand stretches exercises Roberto had taught him. He rolled his shoulders, cracked his neck, tried to release the tension coiling through his body. His phone buzzed. He shouldn't look at it. He knew he shouldn't. But he did. It was a text from an unknown number. Saw you're performing tonight. Good luck, Terry. Brandon. Terry stared at the message. Brandon had his number. How? Why would he reach out? Was this some kind of mind game? He almost responded. Almost sent back something angry, something defensive. But then he stopped. No. This was exactly what Roberto had taught him about. Don't let them in your head. Don't let them control your emotions. Channel everything into the music. He deleted the text without responding. Mr. Blake. 5 minutes. They're ready for you in the wings. Terry stood, straightened his suit jacket, looked at himself one last time in the mirror. His reflection showed a man he barely recognized. Confident. Professional. Ready. You've got this, he whispered to his reflection. You've worked too hard to fail now. He walked out of the dressing room and followed the stage manager through the narrow backstage corridors. He could hear the orchestra warming up, the sound of the audience settling in the distinctive acoustic of the famous hall. They reached the wings, stage left. From here, Terry could see the edge of the stage, the piano sitting there, like a throne waiting for him. Beyond that, the vast expanse of the auditorium, rows and rows of seats rising up into the shadows. The lights were dimming. The audience was quieting. Maestro Chen walked onto the stage to applause, took his place at the conductor's podium. Stand by. Mr. Blake, the stage manager whispered. This was real. This was happening. In 60 seconds, Terry would walk onto that stage. He thought about his 16-year-old self running out of that high school auditorium, convinced his life was over. If he could see this moment, what would he think? Would he believe it was possible? Terry's heart was hammering so hard he thought the audience might hear it. His palms were sweating. His mouth was dry. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to protect himself from potential humiliation. But he didn't run. He'd done enough running. Maestro Chen turned to the wings and nodded. That's your cue, Mr. Blake. Break a leg. Terry took one deep breath. Then another. Then he stepped into the light. The spotlight hit him like a physical force, warm and blinding. For a moment, Terry couldn't see anything beyond the glare. Then his eyes adjusted, and he saw it all. The iconic Isaac Stern Auditorium at Carnegie Hall. 5 tiers of balconies rising up into the darkness. 2,800 faces turned toward him. The orchestra seated and ready. The Steinway grand piano gleaming under the lights. The audience applauded as he walked onto the stage. Not polite applause. Real applause. They were excited to see him, this young pianist they'd heard about, this unknown talent about to perform one of the most challenging concertos in the repertoire. Terry walked across that stage, each step measured, trying to project confidence he didn't fully feel. He was acutely aware of every eye on him, every judgment being formed, every expectation hanging in the air. He reached the piano, bowed to the audience. The applause continued. He turned to Maestro Chen, who gave him an encouraging nod. Then Terry did something he hadn't planned to do. He looked out into the audience. He shouldn't have. He should have just sat down and focused. But something made him look. His eyes scanned the first few rows. The VIP section. Wealthy donors in elegant clothes. Critics with their notebooks. And then third row slightly to the left, he saw him. Brandon Mitchell. Older, now 24 like Terry, but unmistakable. Same blonde hair, same sharp features, same expensive suit. He was sitting between an older couple, probably his parents, and he was looking directly at Terry. Their eyes met. For a second that felt like an eternity, they just stared at each other across the distance. Brandon's face was unreadable. Not smirking, not hostile, just watching. Terry felt something shift inside him. The anger he'd been carrying for 8 years, the desire for revenge, the need to prove himself, all of it crystallized into something pure and clear. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about making Brandon feel bad. This was about showing himself what he was capable of. This was about reclaiming what had been taken from him. He broke eye contact and sat down at the piano. The bench was the perfect height. The piano was beautiful, responsive, perfectly tuned. He adjusted his position slightly, placed his hands gently on his lap, and took one final deep breath. The audience settled into silence. That special kind of silence that only exists in concert halls where 2,800 people collectively hold their breath in anticipation. Maestro Chen raised his baton. The orchestra lifted their instruments. Terry placed his hands on the keys, feeling the cool ivory under his fingers. This was it. No turning back. No second chances. Just him, this piano, this orchestra, and this audience. And somewhere in that audience, the boy who'd tried to destroy him. Terry closed his eyes for just a moment. He thought about Roberto. He thought about his parents. He thought about that 16-year-old kid running away from Asheville. He thought about every dish he'd washed, every hour he'd practiced, every doubt he'd overcome. Then he opened his eyes, nodded to Maestro Chen, and began to play. The first notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled Carnegie Hall. The opening is iconic, 8 dramatic chords that announce the concerto like a challenge, like a declaration. Terry's hands came down on those chords with power and precision. Boom, boom, boom. Each one reverberating through the hall, commanding attention, demanding to be heard. But his hands were shaking. Just slightly, but he could feel it. The fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface, threatening to break through. The orchestra entered lush strings supporting his melody. Terry began the first theme, his right hand dancing across the keys, while his left provided the harmonic foundation. The melody was beautiful, but melancholic, quintessential Rachmaninoff emotion dripping from every note. Terry tried to lose himself in it, tried to forget the audience, forget Brandon, forget everything but the music. But he couldn't quite get there. He was too aware, too conscious, too scared. His fingers stumbled slightly on a run. Nothing major, nothing most people would notice, but he noticed. His breath caught. For a second, he thought about the talent show, about freezing on stage, about everything falling apart. Number. Not this time. He pushed through, regained his focus. The orchestra swept forward with their section, giving him a moment to regroup. When the piano re-entered, Terry was more solid. The trembling in his hands started to settle. The first movement of Rachmaninoff's second is about 12 minutes long. It's a journey starting with that dramatic opening, moving through various themes and moods, building and releasing tension. It requires technical virtuosity and emotional depth. It's not a piece you can fake your way through. Terry played carefully at first, hitting all the right notes, but not quite connecting emotionally. He was in his head, overthinking, worried about mistakes. The audience could probably feel it, that slight distance, that wall between performer and music. But then, about 4 minutes in, something started to shift. There's a section where the piano takes over completely, a cascading run of notes that spirals downward like water over rocks. Terry's fingers moved through it, and for just a moment, he forgot to be scared. He forgot about Brandon, forgot about the audience, forgot about everything except the feeling of his hands on the keys and the sound filling the space around him. That moment of forgetting was all he needed. The wall came down. The fear receded. And Terry started to really play. His body began to move with the music. His shoulders rolled with the phrases. His head tilted back during the crescendos. He started to breathe with the rhythm, inhaling on the releases, exhaling on the attacks. The audience felt the shift. People started leaning forward. The energy in the room changed from polite attention to genuine engagement. Roberto had told him once, music is a conversation. You talk, the audience listens. Then they talk back with their energy. It's a dialogue, not a monologue. Terry could feel that dialogue beginning. The audience was with him now, following his journey, invested in his success. The first movement built toward its climax, the orchestra and piano intertwining in increasingly complex patterns. Terry's hands flew across the keys, executing difficult runs and leaps with growing confidence. The piece demanded everything physically and emotionally, and he was giving it everything. The final section of the first movement is powerful and decisive ending with strong, definitive chords. Terry played them with authority, his whole body behind each note, and as the final chord rang out, he felt something he hadn't expected. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy in the act of making music. The first movement ended. There's no applause between movements in classical performances, but Terry could feel the audience's approval in the quality of their silence. It wasn't the silence of boredom or indifference. It was the silence of people holding their breath, waiting to see what comes next. Terry's hands rested on the keys for a moment. He was sweating. His heart was pounding. But he wasn't scared anymore. He was alive. He was present. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Maestro Chen gave him a small nod of approval. The orchestra readied themselves for the second movement. And Terry, for the first time in 8 years, felt completely free. The second movement of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 is completely different from the first. Where the first movement is powerful and dramatic, the second is intimate and romantic. It's one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever written. a melody so achingly lovely that it's been used in countless films and commercials, instantly recognizable to millions of people who might not even know classical music. Terry began the movement gently, almost tentatively. The piano enters alone, stating the main theme with simple, elegant notes. It's exposed, vulnerable. There's nowhere to hide in this movement. Every note is heard, every emotion is visible. His fingers moved across the keys with a lightness he'd worked years to achieve. This wasn't about power or virtuosity. This was about feeling, about connection, about saying something true. The melody flowed from his hands like water, each phrase shaped with care, each note given space to breathe and resonate. He thought about his mother as he played about her love and sacrifice. He thought about his father working those long hours so Terry could have chances he never had. He thought about Roberto taking a risk on a broken kid with raw talent. The orchestra entered, strings swelling beneath the piano melody, supporting it, elevating it. The dialogue between piano and orchestra in this movement is like a conversation between lovers, each responding to the other, finishing each other's thoughts, moving together in perfect harmony. Terry was completely lost in it now. Time didn't exist. The audience didn't exist. Even the piano beneath his hands seemed to disappear. There was only the music flowing through him, expressing things he could never put into words. This was why he played. This feeling, this connection, this transcendence. The movement built gradually, the emotions intensifying, the music swelling like a tide. There's a section about halfway through where the piano has a series of rising arpeggios, climbing higher and higher, reaching for something just out of grasp. Terry played them with increasing passion, his right hand spanning across the keyboard, each leap landing precisely, each note ringing clear and true. He could feel tears building behind his eyes. Not tears of sadness or fear, but tears of release, of catharsis, of finally being able to express 8 years of pain and healing and growth through music. The audience was completely still. No coughing, no shifting in seats, no rustling programs. They were entranced, caught up in the emotional journey Terry was taking them on. He couldn't see them in the darkness beyond the stage lights, but he could feel them. He could feel their attention, their emotion, their connection to what he was playing. This was the dialogue Roberto had taught him about. This was music as communication, as shared experience, as something bigger than just notes on a page. The second movement has a moment about 3/4 through that's particularly challenging. The piano has to play a series of very quiet, very delicate chords while maintaining the emotional intensity. It's technically difficult and musically demanding. You have to be soft, but not weak, gentle, but not timid. Terry approached this section with total focus. His hands barely touched the keys, coaxing sound rather than forcing it. The notes floated out into the hall, fragile and beautiful, like soap bubbles catching light. In the audience, people were crying. He couldn't see it, but they were. Even hardened critics who'd heard this piece hundreds of times were moved. There was something in Terry's playing, something honest and raw and deeply human that cut through all pretense and touched something essential. In the third row, Brandon Mitchell sat frozen. His face was no longer unreadable. There were tears on his cheeks. His mouth was slightly open. He looked like someone witnessing something they didn't expect, something that challenged everything they thought they knew. But Terry didn't know that. He was somewhere else entirely, somewhere deep inside the music, inside himself, inside the connection between his soul and sound. The second movement drew to its close, the piano and orchestra moving together toward the final resolution. The last notes were quiet, peaceful, like a sigh of contentment after a long journey. Terry played them with infinite care, letting each note fade naturally, not rushing, giving the music space to complete itself. The final chord hung in the air for a moment, then slowly dissolved into silence. Still no applause. That wasn't the protocol, but the quality of the silence had changed again. It was charged, electric, full of unreleased emotion. The audience knew they were experiencing something special, something rare, something they'd remember for years to come. Terry took a breath. His shirt was soaked with sweat. His arms were trembling from the physical and emotional exertion, but he felt more alive than he'd ever felt in his life. One movement left. The finale. The celebration. The triumph. Maestro Chen turned to him with a look that said everything. "You're doing it. You're really doing it." Terry nodded. He was ready. For the first time in his life, he was completely, totally ready. The third movement of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 explodes into life like a celebration. After the introspective beauty of the second movement, the third is pure joy, pure energy, pure exuberance. It's technically the most demanding of the three movements, requiring incredible stamina and virtuosity. The orchestra began with a robust, energetic theme. Then the piano entered, and Terry attacked those keys with everything he had. His hands flew across the keyboard, executing rapid runs and complex patterns with precision and power. This was no longer about being careful or perfect. This was about letting loose, about celebrating, about showing the world what he could do. The music surged and swelled, building momentum like a train gathering speed. Terry's fingers were a blur, moving faster than seemed humanly possible, yet every note was clear, every passage articulate. He was grinning now. He couldn't help it. This was fun. This was what music was supposed to be. Not careful and worried and afraid, but joyful and free and wild. The audience could feel his joy. They were smiling too, caught up in the energy, the vitality, the sheer life force pouring from the stage. There's a section in the third movement where the piano and orchestra engage in what feels like a musical duel, trading increasingly complex phrases, challenging each other, pushing each other higher. Terry played it with ferocious energy. His whole body involved his feet, dancing on the pedals, his shoulders rolling his head, bobbing with the rhythm. He thought about washing dishes in that Charlotte diner. He thought about sleeping in that tiny room. He thought about the years of doubt and pain, and slowly rebuilding himself note by note. Every struggle, every setback, every moment of despair was fuel for this performance energy being transformed into sound, into art, into victory. This wasn't revenge. Revenge would have been petty, small, unsatisfying. This was something bigger. This was proving to himself that he could rise from the ashes, that he could transform pain into beauty, that he could become something extraordinary, despite, or perhaps because of everything he'd endured. The movement built toward its famous climax, a series of massive chords that require the pianist to use their entire body, their full strength. Terry prepared himself, coiling like a spring, gathering his energy. And then he unleashed it. His hands came crashing down on those keys with volcanic force. Each chord rang out like thunder, filling the hall, shaking the air. His arms extended fully on each impact, his entire body behind every note. It was physical, primal, powerful. The orchestra matched him, brass, blazing timpani, thundering strings, sawing frantically. The music was overwhelming, glorious, unstoppable. Terry's face was intense, focused, fierce. This was it. This was the moment everything had been building toward. 8 years of preparation. 8 years of transformation. 8 years of becoming someone new. In the audience, people were on the edges of their seats. Some had tears streaming down their faces. Some had their hands over their mouths. Everyone was completely absorbed, completely present, completely moved. Brandon Mitchell looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Whatever he'd expected when he came here tonight, it wasn't this. Not this level of artistry, not this depth of emotion, not this complete and total command of the music and the audience and the moment. The final page of the concerto is a whirlwind of notes, a technically challenging sprint to the finish that requires perfect control at maximum speed. Terry navigated it flawlessly, his years of training paying off in this crucial moment. The music accelerated faster and faster, building to an inevitable conclusion. The orchestra and piano moved together in perfect synchronization, racing toward the final chords. And then, in an explosion of sound and fury and triumph, it ended. Terry's hands came down on the final chords with every ounce of strength he had left. The sound rang out through Carnegie Hall, powerful and definitive and final. The last note hung in the air. Then silence, complete, absolute silence. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The audience sat frozen, stunned by what they'd just witnessed. Terry lifted his hands from the keys. His chest was heaving. Sweat dripped from his face. His arms were shaking from exhaustion. He stared at the piano, unable to quite believe he'd done it. He'd actually done it. Then the audience exploded. The sound was overwhelming. 2,800 people rising to their feet as one, applauding, cheering, shouting. The wave of sound washed over Terry like a physical force, almost knocking him backward on the bench. He stood up, turned to face the audience, and what he saw took his breath away. Everyone was standing. Every single person in that massive hall was on their feet. The ovation was thunderous, sustained, showing no signs of stopping. People were crying openly. They were throwing programs in the air. They were whistling and shouting, "Bravo, bravo." Terry bowed deeply, trying to take it all in. The orchestra was standing too, applauding him. Maestro Chen came over and embraced him, whispering in his ear, "That was one of the finest performances I've ever witnessed." "Thank you." The applause continued. 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. Terry bowed again, his own tears flowing freely now. He gestured to the orchestra, trying to share the recognition, but they gestured back to him. This was his moment. His triumph. In the third row, Brandon Mitchell was standing and applauding too. His face was streaked with tears. He was shaking his head slightly, like he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Next to him, his parents were applauding too, looking impressed and moved. Terry's eyes found Brandon's across the distance. For a moment, they looked at each other. Terry could have looked away, could have ignored him, could have pretended he wasn't there. But he didn't. He held Brandon's gaze, and in that look, he communicated everything he needed to say. "I survived. I grew. I won. Not against you. Against my own fear. Against my own doubt. I won." Brandon nodded slightly, understanding. Then he looked down, unable to hold Terry's gaze, the weight of his own guilt and regret visible in his posture. But Terry wasn't focused on Brandon anymore. He was looking at all the other faces in the audience. The young black girl in the fifth row who looked at him with stars in her eyes, seeing possibility in his success. The elderly couple in the box seats who were holding hands and crying. The critics in the press section who were applauding as enthusiastically as everyone else. He thought about his parents watching the live stream back in Asheville. He thought about Roberto probably watching from the Blue Note, proud tears in his eyes. He thought about every person who'd believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. The stage manager brought out flowers, bouquet after bouquet. Terry accepted them, overwhelmed, not knowing what to do with them all. The applause kept going. 6 minutes, 7 minutes. Maestro Chen leaned over. "You should bow again. They're not going to stop." Terry bowed once more this time, putting his hand over his heart, trying to convey his gratitude, his disbelief, his joy. The audience responded with even louder cheers. Finally, after nearly 8 minutes of continuous ovation, the applause began to subside. People started sitting down, wiping their eyes, talking to each other in hushed, excited tones. You could feel it in the room, the shared recognition that they'd witnessed something extraordinary, something they'd tell people about for years to come. "I was there the night Terrence Blake played Carnegie Hall," they'd say. "I was there." Terry walked off stage, his legs shaking, barely able to stand. As soon as he was in the wings, away from the audience's view, he collapsed against the wall, his entire body trembling with exhaustion and emotion and relief. A stage manager handed him water. "Mr. Blake, that was incredible, absolutely incredible." Terry drank the water, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped the bottle. He couldn't speak. He had no words for what had just happened, for what he'd just accomplished. Backstage, there was chaos. The foundation director was rushing over, congratulating him. Orchestra members were patting him on the back. Everyone wanted to shake his hand to tell him how moved they were, how brilliant he'd been. But Terry barely registered any of it. He was somewhere else, still processing, still trying to understand that it was real, that it had actually happened, that he'd done what he'd set out to do. His phone was buzzing incessantly in his dressing room, messages flooding in. But there were two he needed to see first. From his mother, "Baby. Baby. We're crying. Everyone in Asheville is calling us. We're so proud. So proud. I love you so much." From Roberto. "You did it, kid. You did it exactly the way I knew you would. Come home and tell me everything. I'll have your favorite whiskey waiting." Terry sat down on the couch in his dressing room and let himself cry. Not tears of sadness or pain this time, but tears of release, of accomplishment, of finally being able to let go of everything he'd been carrying for 8 years. Someone knocked on his door. "Mr. Blake, there are some people who'd like to speak with you. Representatives from record labels, concert promoters, critics wanting interviews." "Give me 10 minutes, Terry said, his voice hoarse. He needed these 10 minutes to himself, to sit in this moment, to remember every detail, to honor the journey that had brought him here from that church basement piano in Asheville to the stage at Carnegie Hall. He looked at himself in the mirror. The same face he'd always had, but different somehow. Older, wiser, harder, softer, broken and rebuilt into something stronger than before. "You did it," he whispered to his reflection. "You actually did it." While Terry was backstage processing his triumph, something else was happening in the auditorium. Brandon Mitchell hadn't left his seat. The crowd around him had mostly dispersed, heading to the reception, but he sat there staring at the empty stage at the piano that was being quietly wheeled away by stagehands. His mother touched his arm. "Brandon, honey, are you all right? That was quite something, wasn't it?" "Yeah," Brandon said distantly. Yeah, it was. We should go to the reception. Your father wants to speak with some of the foundation board members about expanding our donation. You guys go ahead, Brandon said. I'll catch up. His parents exchanged a glance, but left him there, sitting alone in the third row of Carnegie Hall. Brandon put his head in his hands. He'd been thinking about Terry Blake a lot lately. Not constantly, but in those quiet moments when you're honest with yourself about who you are and what you've done. When he'd seen Terry's name on the performance list, he'd been shocked. Terry Blake. The kid from Asheville. The kid he'd destroyed. Brandon had convinced himself over the years that it was just high school drama, just kids being kids, that Terry had probably moved on and forgotten about it. He'd never let himself think about what that night must have been like for Terry, seeing that video on the screen, hearing the laughter, feeling the humiliation. But tonight, watching Terry play, seeing the depth of emotion in his performance, understanding the journey he must have taken to get here, Brandon couldn't hide from it anymore. He'd been jealous. That was the truth of it. Jealous that this poor kid from the wrong side of town, with no advantages, no lessons, no resources, could play piano better than Brandon ever would, despite all his expensive training. Jealous that talent couldn't be bought, that money couldn't make up for the gift Terry had been born with. So he'd tried to destroy it. Tried to take from Terry what he couldn't have himself. And he'd succeeded, or so he'd thought. Terry had disappeared. Left town. Brandon had assumed he'd broken him completely, had driven him away from music forever. But tonight proved otherwise. Terry hadn't been destroyed. He'd been transformed. He'd taken that pain and somehow impossibly used it to become something greater. Brandon's phone was in his hand. He'd sent that text before the show, "Good luck." He'd thought he was being magnanimous, forgiving the bigger person. But he saw now how hollow that was. How presumptuous to think Terry needed anything from him, least of all his luck or forgiveness. He opened social media. The performance was already being talked about. Terrence Blake is trending. Videos from the audience were being posted, though recording had been prohibited. Critics were tweeting, "Just witnessed one of the most moving performances of my career." Terrence Blake at Carnegie Hall. Remember this name. The standing ovation lasted 8 minutes. 8 minutes. And then Brandon saw it. A photo that had been circulating online for years, that horrible video from the talent show. Someone had posted it with the caption, "This is the same kid who just brought Carnegie Hall to tears. Never let them define you. Your comeback can be bigger than your setback." Brandon felt sick. That video was still out there, still hurting Terry even now in his moment of triumph. He made a decision. It wouldn't erase what he'd done. It wouldn't undo the pain. But it was something. He opened Instagram and posted a statement. 8 years ago, I did something cruel. I created and distributed a video designed to humiliate Terrence Blake, a fellow student who had done nothing to me except be more talented than I could ever hope to be. I was jealous, insecure, and I took it out on him in the worst possible way. I drove him away from our school, from our town, and I've had to live with that guilt ever since. Tonight, I watched Terry perform at Carnegie Hall, and I was reminded that talent, real talent, can't be destroyed by small-minded cruelty. It can be delayed, but not defeated. Terry, I know a social media apology is inadequate. I know I can never undo what I did. But I want you and everyone else to know, what I did was wrong. Unforgivable. And what you've become, despite my attempts to destroy you, is extraordinary. To anyone who's ever been bullied, who's ever been told they're not good enough, who's ever had someone try to steal their dream, don't let them. Your gift is yours. Your future is yours. And your comeback can be greater than any setback. I'm sorry, Terry. I hope someday you can forgive me, though I don't deserve it." He posted it, then turned off his phone. It would probably go viral. His parents would be embarrassed. His friends would ask questions. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that he'd finally told the truth. Brandon stood up and walked out of Carnegie Hall into the cold New York night, feeling simultaneously lighter and heavier than he'd ever felt in his life. He didn't go to the reception. He couldn't face Terry, couldn't pretend to congratulate him like they were peers. They weren't. Terry was an artist. Brandon was just someone who'd tried to destroy art and failed. The best thing he could do now was stay out of Terry's way and let him shine. The reception after the performance was held in Carnegie Hall's Rosenthal Pavilion, a beautiful space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking 7th Avenue. By the time Terry arrived, still dazed and overwhelmed, the room was packed with elegantly dressed people, champagne-flowing conversations buzzing. When Terry walked in, a hush fell over the room. Then someone started clapping. Then someone else. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding again. Terry smiled, embarrassed and grateful, and tried to make his way through the crowd. But people kept stopping him, wanting to shake his hand, to congratulate him, to introduce themselves. "Mr. Blake, I'm from Deutsche Grammophon. We'd love to discuss a recording contract with you. Terry David Chen from the Boston Symphony. We're planning our next season, and would be honored if you'd consider." "Mr. Blake, I'm a critic for the New York Times. Would you have time for an interview?" It was overwhelming. Every major classical music organization seemed to be represented, all of them wanting a piece of him, wanting to be part of his story. Margaret Richardson, the foundation director, rescued him. "Gentlemen, please. Mr. Blake just gave the performance of a lifetime. Let him breathe." She guided Terry to a quieter corner. "How are you holding up?" "I honestly don't know," Terry admitted. "This is all so much." "Get used to it," she said with a kind smile. "Your life just changed, Mr. Blake. That performance, it was extraordinary. I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never seen a reaction like that. You're going to have every opportunity in the world now. My advice, take your time. Choose carefully. And never forget why you play." She handed him her card. "Call me tomorrow. We'll talk about next steps." Terry's phone kept buzzing. He checked it during a brief moment alone. Roberto had called 3 times. Terry called him back. Kid Roberto's voice was thick with emotion. "I just watched the stream, Terry. I don't even have words. You were brilliant, perfect. Everything I knew you could be and more. I couldn't have done it without you," Terry said, his own voice breaking. "Yes, you could have. That talent, that passion, that's all you. I just helped you refine it. I'm so proud of you, Terry. So damn proud." They talked for a few more minutes before Terry had to go, more people wanting his attention. The rest of the night was a blur. Terry met conductors, producers, fellow pianists, wealthy donors. Everyone wanted to know his story, where he'd trained, how he'd developed such a distinctive style. He told them about Roberto and the Blue Note, about teaching himself as a teenager, about the journey. He didn't mention the talent show or Brandon. That wasn't part of the story he wanted to tell anymore. That was just the prologue. This tonight was the real story. By midnight, Terry was exhausted. He escaped back to his hotel, collapsed on the bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. His phone showed hundreds of notifications. Instagram was blowing up. His follower count was climbing rapidly. The performance videos people had secretly recorded were being shared thousands of times. Critics were publishing their reviews, all glowing. But one notification stood out. Brandon Mitchell had posted something. Terry almost didn't click on it. What could Brandon possibly say that would matter now? But he clicked. And he read Brandon's confession, his apology, his admission of guilt. Terry read it twice. Then he closed the app. He didn't respond. didn't react, didn't share it or comment on it. Brandon's apology was Brandon's journey. Terry's journey was separate now, moving in a different direction entirely. Years ago, an apology like this would have meant everything to Terry. It would have been the closure he desperately needed. But now he realized he didn't need Brandon's apology. He'd already forgiven Brandon, not for Brandon's sake, but for his own. Holding on to that anger, that pain, it would have poisoned his music, poisoned his life. He'd let it go somewhere during those years of training, of healing, of becoming someone new. Brandon's apology was for Brandon's soul, not Terry's. Terry turned off his phone and lay in the darkness of his hotel room, listening to the sounds of New York City outside his window. Tomorrow he'd fly back to Charlotte. He'd return to the Blue Note, tell Roberto everything in detail. He'd call his parents and actually talk to them for hours, answer all their questions, share every moment of this experience. And then he'd figure out what came next. Because this wasn't an ending. This was a beginning. Over the next 2 years, Terry Blake's career took off in ways he'd never imagined. He signed with a prestigious record label and released his debut album, a collection of Rachmaninoff and Chopin that went to #1 on the classical charts. He was invited to perform at major concert halls around the world. London, Paris, Vienna, Tokyo. Everywhere he went, audiences responded with the same enthusiasm they'd shown at Carnegie Hall. He moved out of his boarding house in Charlotte into a small but comfortable apartment. Nothing fancy. He didn't need fancy. But it had space for a piano, and that was all that mattered. He continued to work with Roberto at the Blue Note, though now as a featured performer rather than a bartender. Every few months when he wasn't touring, he'd play a show there, keeping his connection to the place that had saved him, to the man who'd believed in him when no one else did. He started a foundation, the Second Chance Scholarship, providing free music education and instruments to kids from low-income families. He knew what it was like to have talent, but no resources, and he was determined that money would never be the thing that stopped a gifted kid from pursuing their dreams. He finally went home to Asheville. It was strange walking those familiar streets, seeing the old high school, the church where he'd first found that piano. His parents cried when they saw him, held him for 10 minutes straight, told him how proud they were about 100 times. He played a free concert for the town at the same high school auditorium where he'd been humiliated 8 years earlier. The crowd gave him a standing ovation. The talent show incident was never mentioned. It didn't need to be. Everyone knew the story. Everyone knew how far he'd come. He established himself not just as a virtuoso, but as an artist with something to say. Critics praised his technical skill, but what they talked about more was his emotional depth, his ability to make people feel something real through his music. He never became arrogant or forgot where he came from. He remembered washing dishes, remembered sleeping in that tiny room, remembered the years of struggle. Success hadn't been handed to him. He'd earned it note by note, hour by hour, year by year. As for Brandon Mitchell, his public apology had consequences. Some people praised him for taking accountability. Others criticized him for waiting so long. His parents were embarrassed. His social circle changed. But the apology also freed him. He stopped trying to be someone he wasn't. He left his father's investment firm and went back to school, eventually becoming a teacher. Not a music teacher, he wasn't qualified for that, but a teacher nonetheless, working with at-risk youth, trying in his own way to make up for the harm he'd caused. He and Terry never became friends. That wasn't realistic or necessary, but years later they ran into each other at a charity event. They spoke briefly, cordially, like acquaintances. There was no drama, no anger, no resentment. Just two people who'd once been part of each other's story, now living separate lives. Congratulations on everything, Brandon said. You deserve all of it. Thanks, Terry replied simply. And that was enough. that was closure. Roberto retired from the Blue Note at 70, selling the club to a former student, but staying on as a consultant. He spent his retirement traveling to hear Terry play whenever he could, sitting in the audience with tears of pride in his eyes, knowing he'd been part of something special. Terry never forgot that night at Carnegie Hall. How could he? But it wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of a chapter that's still being written. A chapter about redemption, about resilience, about the power of art to transcend pain and transform lives. He kept playing, kept performing, kept growing as an artist. Each performance was a chance to tell a story, to connect with an audience, to prove once again that talent combined with dedication can overcome anything. 5 years after Carnegie Hall, Terry was invited to give a TED Talk. He almost declined. Public speaking wasn't his thing, but Roberto convinced him. "You have a story people need to hear," Roberto said. "Not just musicians. Everyone who's ever been knocked down and wondered if they could get back up." So Terry gave the talk. He told his story, start to finish. The talent show, the video, running away, washing dishes, finding Roberto, the long journey back to music, and that night at Carnegie Hall. But he ended with something that surprised even himself. "People ask me if I'm angry about what happened to me," Terry said, standing on that TED stage. "They ask if I hate Brandon Mitchell, if I wish I could go back and change things. And the honest answer is no. Don't get me wrong. What happened was cruel. It was wrong. And if I could protect my younger self from that pain, I would. But that pain, as much as I hated it at the time, shaped who I became. It forced me to decide, was I going to let that moment define me? Or was I going to define myself? I chose the second option. But it took years. Years of washing dishes and doubting myself. Years of avoiding music because it hurt too much. Years of slowly, painfully rebuilding not just my skill, but my confidence, my sense of self-worth, my belief that I had something valuable to offer the world. And here's what I learned: your worst moment doesn't define you. Your response to your worst moment defines you. You can let it destroy you, or you can let it refine you. You can stay a victim, or you can become a victor. Not over the person who hurt you, but over your own fear and doubt and pain. Excellence is the best response to hatred. Not revenge, not bitterness. Excellence. Becoming so good at what you do that the people who tried to diminish you become footnotes in your story rather than chapters. If you're going through something hard right now, if someone has tried to break you, if you feel like your dreams are over, I want you to know something: they're not. Your dreams are not over. Your story is not over. This is just the chapter where you learn how strong you really are. Keep going. Keep working. Keep believing. Your comeback can be greater than any setback. I promise you that. I'm living proof of it. And remember, excellence is the best revenge. But it's not really revenge at all. It's redemption. It's transformation. It's taking your pain and turning it into something beautiful, something meaningful, something that helps other people believe they can overcome too. That's what music taught me. That's what that night at Carnegie Hall meant to me. Not that I'd beaten Brandon, but that I'd beaten my own fear. That I'd become the artist I was always meant to be, despite everything that tried to stop me. So whatever you're facing, whatever knocked you down, whatever made you doubt yourself, remember, you have a choice. You can let it end you, or you can let it begin you. Choose to begin. Choose to rise. Choose to become. The talk went viral. Millions of views. Thousands of comments from people saying Terry's story had inspired them to keep going, to not give up, to turn their pain into purpose. But Terry didn't do it for the views or the comments or the fame. He did it because he remembered being 16, feeling like his life was over, wishing someone had told him it would get better. He did it for every kid who's ever been bullied, every person who's ever been told they're not good enough, every dreamer who's ever been knocked down. He did it because his story wasn't just about him. It was about all of us. About the human capacity to survive, to grow, to transform, to overcome. And that more than any performance at Carnegie Hall, more than any standing ovation, more than any critical acclaim, was what made everything worth it. If Terry's story moved you, if it resonated with something you're going through, I want you to do something. I want you to think about your own comeback story, the one you're living right now, or the one you need to start. What knocked you down? What made you doubt yourself? What dream did you abandon because someone told you it was impossible? Now ask yourself, what would it look like to try again? What would it look like to take that pain and transform it into fuel? What would it look like to prove to yourself, not to anyone else, just to yourself, that you're stronger than you think? Your comeback doesn't have to look like Carnegie Hall. It doesn't have to be dramatic or public or impressive to anyone else. It just has to matter to you. Maybe it's going back to school. Maybe it's starting that business. Maybe it's picking up that instrument you abandoned. Maybe it's simply believing in yourself again after years of doubt. Whatever it is, start today. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today. Take one small step toward becoming who you were meant to be before the world told you it was impossible. Because here's the truth that Terry Blake learned and that I hope you'll remember. Your past doesn't determine your future. Your pain doesn't define your potential. And your comeback really can be greater than your setback. Don't let them take your gift. Don't let them steal your dream. Don't let one moment or even years of moments convince you that you're not enough. You are enough. You always were. You just forgot for a while. It's time to remember. If this story inspired you, if it made you think about your own journey, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories like this. Because the world needs reminders that redemption is possible, that growth is achievable, that coming back stronger is not just a cliché, it's a choice. Your moment is coming. Your stage is waiting. Your standing ovation is out there. Go earn it.